Ervil LeBaron is an author, a social media coach, a mother of 5, and a grandmother. Ervil LeBaron also escaped a polygamist cult and lived to tell the story. This is her second shot.
On Second Shot, we cover 2 new stories every week to find out what kind of wisdom the world is dishing out today. And at the heart of every one of these stories are people, just like you and me, who've had to overcome incredible odds, to face the greatest challenges, to struggle and fight back. But now, we're changing it up. In these episodes, we're skipping the headlines and going straight to the people that inspire us to grow, to be bold, seek change, and act courageously when the rest of the world may not. A second look, a second chance, a second shot. This is Second Shot Sit-Downs with your host, Jenny Anchondo.
Welcome, everybody, to Second Shot Sit-Downs. I'm your host, Jenny Anchondo. I wanted to give you a heads up just right from the get-go here that typically we put all of these out as family-friendly content. We say listen with the kids, listen with anybody. This one is going to be more adult content. So as I mentioned off the get-go, we're talking about a woman who escaped from a polygamist cult, Ervil LeBaron. And then this is also just a trigger warning in terms of a couple discussion topics. We're talking about trauma, childhood abuse, and neglect. So we just want to make sure everybody's in a space where they can hear and digest that kind of content. Now I want to tell you about our guest. Okay, Ervil LeBaron is the author of The Polygamist Daughter. She is also a first-generation non-polygamist. Anna has more than 50 siblings and spent much of her childhood with her family, running from the FBI and running from the Mexican police. She is the daughter of notorious polygamist Ervil LeBaron, whose cult is responsible for more than 28 murders. In fact, some say even more than that. He died in jail, but she escaped, and she is here today to share her story and how she fought for her second shot. Welcome, Ervil LeBaron.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Gosh, you know what? I gotta, first of all, I'm personally so inspired by you and your story and what you've done. I'm touched that you had the strength to get through it and then to write this book. So that's just a thank you from me to you for having the strength to do that, because I know that could not have been easy. I'm wholly impressed.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's start from that escape. I mean, I think people hear escaped from a polygamist cult, and the first thing you wonder is, how did you know it was something you should escape from, considering that's how you were raised? And also, how'd you do it?
Yeah. So I didn't know that I was in a cult. I escaped when I was 13, but let me tell you a little story. When I was 10, I was reading U.S. News and World Report about the Jonestown Massacre.
Yeah? Okay.
And I was reading and thought to myself, these poor people in this cult. So that just tells you that when you're just surrounded by it and it's your normal, it's hard to know that there is something bad going on that you need to extricate yourself from.
You had no idea.
I had no idea. And I didn't even have an idea when I escaped. When I ran away from home at age 13, I wasn't running away from the cult because I still didn't know that I was in a cult.
Okay.
I was running away from some events that were imminent. My mom was planning to move our family from Houston, where we lived, back to Denver, where we had lived before. And I didn't want to end up in Denver.
Because Denver, if for people who haven't read the book, I mean, that we're talking about true child abuse.
Yes.
And you were work
slave
conditions.
labor.
Yeah. Explain what that was like, that work situation in Denver that you knew as a teenager. Okay, I don't know I'm in a cult, but I know I don't want to go back to that.
Right. We were working 12-hour days all summer long under very difficult circumstances with very little food. I mean, we had to dumpster dive for food. We had to dumpster dive for clothing, and I was a part of that.
Yeah.
And in Houston, where we were living, still in the cult, but under somebody else's direction and authority, we were given at least a little bit of dignity for our work. We would get actually paid $5 a week to work all week. And so for a 13-year-old who never had anything, $5 a week is like a large sum of money.
Of course.
And so it gave us just a little bit of dignity.
Yeah, and
you didn't paid.
So you knew you didn't want to leave. And so how did you get away? How did you get out?
Well, the man and the lady that were in charge of the Houston faction of our group, it was my sister Lillian and her husband Mark.
Because you weren't even living with your parents at that point in time.
I was living with my mom.
Never lived with your dad.
Never lived with my dad, but I was living with my mom at the time. So I called my older sister, she's a half sister of mine, and just let her know, I don't want to go to Denver. I called her took the phone, remember the phones with the long cords, snuck away into the bathroom and whispered and called her and said, I don't want to go to Denver. And she just said to me, start walking. And so that's what I did.
And she came and found you miles later.
She found me. I'd walked just a little over 3 miles. So if you do any kind of walking or running, you know that's a 5K.
Yeah.
So I call that my 5K to freedom.
Oh.
And she found me. She hid me in a hotel for several days. During that time, my mom looked for me. And then even though she couldn't find me, she packed up all my siblings in the station wagon, leaving everything behind, and drove to Denver.
And you're alone. At this point, you're alone in a hotel, 13 years old, you guys. I mean, and I think that's really hard to imagine that a 13-year-old would have the wherewithal to understand her living conditions were going to be so bad, but also to separate from her mother and from all these siblings. How many kids were living in the house at the time?
There were, at the time, probably 10 or 12. It changed regularly, the number of people that lived in the house, because so many were on the run from the law and all of that. People came and left in the middle of the night, the adults did. And so you went to bed one at night, and in the morning you didn't know who you were going to wake up to, whether it was additional people or some that had left.
As a child, and I want you guys to go, it's like I want to tell the audience, put yourself in her shoes, but it's just very impossible to imagine. You were prepared for FBI raids. You were prepared for questioning by police. These are the sort of things that you were conditioned to be aware of. What was that like? What was that conditioning like?
We just lived in a constant state of fear, of being found out, of being caught. The FBI busting through the doors, being questioned. We were taught and drilled to lie to people who were outsiders. And we weren't even allowed to play outside for the most part, because with so many kids living in one house, in a regular house, having that many kids playing constantly outside would bring attention that was unwanted.
Right.
So we lived just in fear, chaos, and insecurity.
And what was some of the, aside from the, working conditions that you all were under and the sometimes lack of education for children, what were some of the other criminal activities that family members were involved in that warranted them running from the law?
They were, they were killing people. That my dad would order hits on the ones who dared to leave. He would order hits on rivals. And when we say the ones who dared to leave, there's a doctrine called blood atonement, meaning there are some sins that the blood of Christ can't cover. And so you have to atone for that sin with the shedding of your own blood. And so people that would leave our cult after they joined and realized, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff happening. Right. If they knew what was going on and they could go to the police with information, my dad would order hits on them.
Oh, it's so scary, Anna. People, a lot of our audience is in Dallas. They're all over the country and really all over the world, but a lot of people are in Dallas. So people in North Texas or Texas area will remember maybe the 4 o'clock murders, which is kind of what they were coined. This was your family.
Yeah.
Right? And what age were you when this happened?
I was 19.
So you were 19, and we talk about she escaped from the cult, but this is still your family.
Yes.
Right? So you're still connected to all of these people. Describe what happened on that day.
Well, I had already gotten out. I was living with my sister and brother-in-law, and I had just graduated from high school. It was the following summer when the things that my dad had ordered. My dad died when I was 12, but while he was in prison, he had penned a document that became known as the Book of the New Covenant, where people that had betrayed him were listed. And the summer in 1987 began my siblings going and fulfilling the things that my dad had penned years before. And they were doing this even after his death. So from the grave.
Because they were so wrapped up in
brainwashed.
In what he taught them.
Yes. So they began. And so when the first one when we found out that Dan Jordan had been killed in 1987, that began us living in fear once again. And so our greatest fears came true on the day that became known as the 4 o'clock murders. It was June 27th, 1988. Mark, Dwayne, his brother, Dwayne's daughter, Jenny, and my brother, Ed, were gunned down at the same time in 3 different locations. Ed was killed right here in Irving, Texas.
Gosh. So you're sort of on your own, so to speak, at this point in time, but then still connected to your family. What was it like in that aftermath with all of these children, all these young children having to come to the realization that their family members were gone?
Yeah. It was very traumatic for everyone involved to experience that day.
Yeah.
And then the aftermath of that day. 7 months later, my sister Lillian committed suicide, leaving her 6 children orphaned. So trauma compounded by more trauma for those children. And then, but for me as well. Mark was like a father figure to me, having finished raising me from age 13 till we lost him at age 19. And Lillian also, a mother figure in my life, even though because she was much older than me and she had 6 children. And the events of that day and then the subsequent suicide of my sister left me in a clinical depression that was very difficult for me to come out of. And the other part was that I didn't have any professional treatment for that.
Oh my gosh, Anna, you barely had schooling, much less a professional treatment. I mean, I think, that the things that the rest of the world had access to and at least knew was an option, that was not even within your sphere of knowledge. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
So you were going through all this trauma, and we speak about the trauma. I mean, we're also talking about, the priming for sexual abuse, right? And for marriage as a young teenager. Yeah. At this point, you knew that you had been initially promised off to somebody else in marriage, right?
It happened regularly in our cult. My dad would use his daughters as pawns to get the men that would join to do his bidding, including carrying out the hits that he would order. And so depending on our age at the time and who he was talking to and who was in his favor, when you reached around the age of 14 or 15 is when they would seriously start wanting to marry you off to some older man with a bunch of wives. And that was the life that we were groomed for and that we were prepared for and knew was in our future.
Was that scary for you?
It didn't feel like it at the time because we didn't know any different.
Because it's almost like you just, at 13, right? You were just maybe a year or two away from marriage, right?
Correct.
From leaving what would be known as your childhood with your brothers and sisters to becoming a mother.
Yeah. I didn't know, like the men in the cult would sometimes approach the girls and make very inappropriate comments about, would you want to one day be my wife? And, already starting that, fawning over us to get us to, curry favor and, whatever. I didn't know until later, after I was living with Mark and Lillian for quite some time. Lillian took me in her room and dug through her closet and pulled out this old piece of paper from among lots of other papers and showed me that from prison, my father had written a letter promising me to her husband, Mark. And their marriage was monogamous at the time and stayed that way, which was very rare in our group.
So you had this anomaly of a situation that allowed you to sort of escape that one little route.
Yes.
But when you think about your brothers and sisters, did they all end up in a polygamous situation?
A lot of my siblings were married off, especially the older ones. The younger ones, after my dad died, some of the younger ones escaped that, including myself. But the older ones lived that life and were affected by it. And, in some ways, their adult lives are still affected by that, even though they're not living it anymore.
What happened after the 4 o'clock murders? Was the cult over?
Well, after that, those events, they're just, when my father died, he left a gap in the rule and the authority of the cult and who was going to run it and be the next, prophet. And that resulted in a bloodbath. And these were things that I was unaware of, and that's why I didn't include them in my book, because if I wasn't aware of it as a child, I didn't include it. I wanted the readers to get the perspective of the child born and raised in that cult. So I wasn't aware, but people were dying around me, and nobody talked about it. It wasn't discussed. We weren't told. There was no grieving. There was no mourning. The person left. Nobody would discuss it or talk about it. So it wasn't until I was 15. I'd been living with Mark and Lillian for quite some time, and I found a book called Prophet of Blood that had been written about my family of origin. And I read it wide-eyed and terrorized by the information that came out. That was when I realized that I'd been raised in a cult. That's when I realized that there were all these people that I loved and cared about that I would never see again because they were dead.
Oh my gosh, Anna.
And I couldn't talk about it with anyone because I was living with Mark and Lillian, and I didn't want them to know that I knew these things. And it was just a really trying time.
I mean, the overarching thing I keep hearing here, such a big difference between your childhood and what we would consider to be a regular American childhood, is the ability to have emotions, like the ability to be excited, to grieve, to be sad, to be upset, to be angry, to be confused. Is that accurate?
Very accurate.
Was this an emotionless childhood for all of these kids?
For the kids and for the adults. Dr. Brene Brown, says you can't selectively numb your emotions. If you numb the negative ones, then you're also numbing the positive ones.
Yeah.
And so if the negative emotions and the positive ones are all numbed, that leaves you with just this little narrow reality of emotion that you're allowed that's safe. And what was safe was pretending like everything was fine and that you were fine. Everything was fine. I'm fine. I'm good. And you had to pretend that all the time.
Anna, okay. So here's the thing. I mentioned in the intro, you guys, all the things that she's done now. She's a social media coach. She promotes other people's books. She's written this incredible book herself. And so I want, look, not everybody can relate to this specific situation you've been through, but a lot of people can relate to the neglect, the abuse, etc. And so I want to get into, in this next segment, how you went from point A to point B, the specific healing steps, what your practices are today, and how you came to live in healthy relationships with your children. So we're going to talk about that coming up in the second segment of Second Shot Sit Downs. Really quick break to tell you guys about, and we have been so pumped about this, our new sponsor of the Second Shot podcast. It is myllc.com. So Heath actually introduced me to this company a long time ago because he's been using them for everything. Every time he puts together a new business, he goes there, gets the LLC set up. They send back a little portfolio with everything done. It's legally savvy, legally sound, and put together for you. So if you're somebody who's sort of like thinks that that's the daunting part of a business, which for me, it always has been, myllc.com is for real where you want to go. And they're also hooking you guys up with a deal. So write it down. Maybe you're not starting a business today, but maybe you're getting inspired by the interviews. It is this 99 My LLC, which gives you $99 off of a new corporation or LLC. I will also tell you, we definitely price checked before doing this. It is for sure the most affordable option. Heath and I have been using them for years and years. We just adore this company. So myllc.com. And again, the code for $99 off is 99 My LLC. Okay, we're back with Ervil LeBaron again, talking about her journey from a polygamist cult to where she is today. And really, what I want to focus on now is just the hope, the redemption, the fact that you can have life after this type of trauma. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I found really fascinating about this was that, this was done in the name of religion, right? So you'd been raised, and I would think it would be very hard to find your way back to any sort of faith after this. So how'd you do it? Because I know you consider yourself to be a follower of Jesus now.
Yes. I think that the reason why I have been able to sustain that and come to that and turn to that is because when we were being raised, like I said before, we were on the run from the law. The adults were not concerned about the children. So we weren't given really very much religious training or upbringing.
Okay.
We did know certain things and were taught certain things, the 10 Commandments, for example, different things like that. But when I escaped, I was enrolled by Mark and Lillian into a private Christian school.
Okay.
And so the teachers there were given just enough of my background that they empathized with me and embraced me, kind of took me under their wing and nurtured me. Mm-hmm. And so being in that environment 5 days a week in school and then on Sundays and youth groups on Friday nights, all of those experiences where I experienced normalcy for the first time. I experienced feeling safe, feeling cared for, feeling nurtured, all of the things that you would want somebody that had been through what I'd been through to have. And they were providing that. And so when it came time for them, when you're in a church environment, they do offer you and present the gospel to you. And so I was in a place where this experience was the best thing I had ever had. And so I was open and receptive.
And you were able to tell the difference between what had been sold to you before as this religion and then what was then given to you as this hug of faith and Christianity and love. And you could tell the difference even as a child.
Very much so.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I'm so thankful that the people in that school did right by you and didn't, cause further harm in the name of any sort of religion. I'm so glad you were able to be open to that.
Right.
And to be open to that love, because I think sometimes when people cut it off,
right,
because they've been burned, they've been hurt so badly by something like that. You also talk about, you've sought out a lot of help. I mean, you've done work on your own. It wasn't like you escaped and the abuse stopped and all of a sudden, miraculously, you can feel emotions again.
I wish.
Yeah. So talk about that journey and kind of, how that went.
Well, I eventually got married and began my own family. I had 3 boys of my own. Eventually, I had 5 children. But when the healing started, I had 3 boys.
Okay.
I was in my mid-20s, and I was on a play date with a friend. And through some circumstances that I talk about in the book, the night before that play date, I had a horrifying nightmare. Where in that nightmare, my brother, full-blood brother, pulls up in a brown van, enters the house with guns and others, and shoots me.
And now you've got your children of your own.
And I'm laying on the floor in my nightmare, thinking to myself, pretend like you're dead, because if they think you're dead, they won't shoot you again, and you can go find your children. And so that was just a horrifying nightmare to wake up to. And so I risked all kinds of things by telling her, because up until that moment, I did not talk about my family of origin very much. But I told this friend. And
just at this play date.
At a play date.
A new mom friend. Which, if you're a mom, these play dates can be, they're just kind of like you sit there, you hang out with your kids. I mean, we're not usually getting that deep on that. But this was a game changer for you.
This was a game changer.
The fact that you opened up to her.
She said to me, because I was going to a church, and she said, at your church, do they have a lay ministry counseling center? And I said, no, they don't. And she goes, well, at my church, they do. If I make you an appointment, will you go? And at that point, I didn't even recognize that I needed help. And she did, though.
Yeah.
And she made the appointment, and then she says to me, do you need me to watch your boys while you're there, or do you need me to drive you? Like, she fully intended for me to go and sit down at that appointment.
You guys, this is so key. Like, this is so key when offering help. Like, you don't just say the resources are out there.
Yeah.
She was like, I will watch your kids. I will take you.
Yeah.
And made it sounds like she didn't make it seem like any big deal for her. She knew you needed that. And so you did. I mean, you did your part too.
I sat down with a woman. I don't know her name. I don't know the church name. I just know that I sat there for an hour and really for the first time told a complete stranger everything about my family of origin that I could fit into an hour that would lead up to that moment, why I would have such a horrific nightmare. And she very wisely at the end of that appointment gave me a business card for a professional counselor and said, the kind of help that you need, I can't offer you here. And so I began professional counseling. It was 1995. And I talk about in the book that it took me 5 years of professional therapy, professional counseling, to get to the point where I could get back in touch with my emotions. And the first, little bit with her, it would be hard for me to cry. I would shed one little tear or two, and it was so uncomfortable for me.
Well, you had been raised to not feel.
Right. And so eventually more tears would come, and then more, and then more. And finally, at about 5 years, I tapped into the depth, the deep, deep well of grief that was just inside of me. When I tapped into that, I would spend my hour with her sobbing, gut-wrenching sobs that would leave my abs aching the next day. And that well of grief wasn't just for the people that had died and that we had lost and for the trauma that we experienced and the abuse.
And people in and out of your life in general.
Yeah. It was grief for the people that we lost and the things that we lost, but also grief for the things that should have been and weren't. The fact that I was raised fatherless. I met my dad when I was 9 years old and spent time with him 2 times that I can remember.
And you just hung on to those times. Right? Like they were such a gift.
Yes.
And now as an adult, you're realizing what should have been in place.
And so those things were grieved during that time period. And so people that meet me today and that find me on social media today and experience who I am today, very different than who I was before. The joy that I have that's real and the way that I can have fun and experience my life in such a big and vivacious and effervescent way.
Yes, lively, yeah.
What people experience from me today, I say that my pathway to the joy I have today was paved with grief. And I had to go through that. There was no way around it. There was no way to bypass the suffering and the grief that was buried inside of me.
This is important to kind of like take in. I don't want that comment to just like go in one ear and out the other. First of all, she said 5 years. 5 years to feel. We want to go in and we want to have an appointment and we want it to fix everything.
We want 6 weeks and 6 steps and,
Yes, especially
one
now.
and done. And it's just not that way for most people.
Yeah.
I do understand that miracles still happen and that people can, have an experience that changes them overnight. And I've watched it happen for other people. But for most people, it's healing is a process. Healing is a journey.
I think it's encouraging to hear that it did take that time and the results that you got, because sometimes along that journey, people don't want to go to the appointment. Like they don't want to go and they don't want to feel the feelings.
Right.
Like, look, I already had the bad past and I don't want to relive it. But
You know what my therapist said to me?
No, tell me.
She says, when you start therapy, it gets worse before it gets better, because you have been in denial and been suppressing all of that for so long. And then when you finally tap into it and you get to experience that emotion that should have been expressed a long time ago, but wasn't, it feels worse than it actually feels when it happened. But what she says, and she would remind me of this, is that re-experiencing the trauma, the abuse, and the neglect that we experienced, re-experiencing it in a safe environment with a therapist or a friend or any of that kind of thing, it's never worse when you're re-experiencing it in that safe place.
Okay, because you're in the safe place.
You already lived through it.
Yeah.
Like, if you're sitting in a therapist's office, that means you survived. You did it. You managed to get yourself into that place. And I want to say that anybody who decides, I'm going to go get therapy, I'm going to go talk to a professional about the things that I experienced, it will feel worse. But it's not ever going to be worse than actually walking through and living through the things that you already survived. And you can do this.
Oh, that's so key. It's so encouraging, you guys, because with everything that Anna's been through and the strength that you had to keep going, and really solo. Because as an adult, a lot of us still go to our parents, and that's something that you did not have the benefit of being able to do. So you had to be so self-sustaining, even as an adult and even as a mom. And I want to talk about that, how you were able to, we all talk about, oh gosh, I'm becoming my mother. Oh gosh, I'm being like my parents. But real talk, you couldn't do that.
Right.
So how did you change the trajectory of your family in being first generation non-polygamists?
Well, in addition to therapy and journaling and, talking to my siblings, like by that time, the cult did end. And it did, in the early 90s, it was over. And so when my siblings and I would get together, and I talk about some of that in the book, we were able to hash and rehash all of our stories. And having those safe people who understood without you having to explain was so therapeutic. So talking to siblings, talking to friends, safe people. And that's the key part. Whether it's a spiritual mentor, a counselor, a therapist, a friend, if they're safe people, that's where the therapy happens. That's where it's therapeutic, and the value of it is therapeutic.
Okay.
And so just being able to talk a bit with my siblings and do all of those things helped get those stories from the inside of me to the outside of me, externalizing them.
How did you learn to be a parent? How did you learn to be a mom? Was that another part of your church upbringing, or was that inherent to you?
I think being a mom was inherent because we were just surrounded by moms.
Yeah, and it seems like you raised some of your younger siblings already.
Yes, we were part of that, like the help that would help the moms that had small children, and that began at a very young age. So having that maternal instinct was natural, but parenting was not, because we weren't parented.
No, you were sent to work 12 hours a day.
We weren't being parented.
You barely got food. So let's be honest, right?
When I became an adult and I got married and started my own family, one of the things that literally saved my life was being able to read.
Okay.
I was a reader from a young age, and as an adult, I left behind, all the romance novels and things that I was enjoying as a teenage girl, and became what I call a self-help junkie.
Okay.
Everything that I needed to know about marriage and family and parenting and homeschooling and finance and just all of the things that as an adult you are supposed to know and your parents are supposed to teach you, but I had no one. I was self-taught in the form of a book. Every subject out there that you need to know about, there are people who are experts on that subject matter, and it doesn't even cost you anything. You walk into a library and they will get you any book you need.
Oh, that's so important. It's so important. We make so many excuses. We make so many excuses for our past, for our childhood, for our lack of education, our lack of finances, our lack of, resources. And
And if you can't read, there are people that will teach you to read.
Absolutely,
You know, there are literacy programs. So there's just there's resources out there for everyone. And books ended up being the thing that I turned to. So I had mentors that I claim as my mentors who I've never met. They mentored me in the form of books.
I do that too.
And it's super powerful. Like in nowadays podcasts, if you don't like to read or reading's not your jam, you can learn anything through a podcast, just about.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And that's why we do this. I mean, to just like be a free resource for people. What's your relationship with your family like now? How your
My children or my siblings?
Your siblings and the family that was at one point a part of the cult.
Yeah. Like I said, everybody in my family is out of the cult.
Yeah.
So there's nothing, and there's no danger to me in telling my story and any of that. And through the magic and wonder of Facebook, I've been able to reconnect with most of the families that want to be in touch with me. I am. And we get together for weddings and, sometimes funerals. And nowadays, my family dies of natural causes. It's incredible.
Which never happened before.
Which did not happen before. And so we get together, at certain times of the year and just visiting. I'll have a sibling or, whatever. Hey, I'm in Dallas. Can I crash at your house? And it's just wonderful to be able to experience normalcy, even among, all the siblings that I have, and being able to have those connections to them. The thing that I love about our family is when we used to get together back, when all this was new and we were out and it was new, all we could talk about was the past. And those stories were told and retold and retold. But what began to happen that was just incredible to me is as we would get together and plan birthday parties and different things that would, draw us together, we began to create new memories and fun memories and normal memories of family.
And positive.
And now, we get together and we can talk about, hey, remember that time we went to the beach, and remember that time we went to, whatever, the concert, whatever. Those things, that birthday party, that wedding, and we have all those pictures and memories that are made that feel so normal that it just makes me emotional to think about the fact that we have overcome so much.
So much. I'm so happy you have that. I'm so happy you made it to that point. What did this book, you guys, is so revealing. What did your mom think of this book when it came out?
Well, she didn't have to wait till it came out because I told her when I was writing the book, she was very nervous, naturally, about the way I was going to portray her. And so I assured her that there was nothing about me writing this book that was intended to dishonor her, even though she continues to believe in the practice of polygamy, which devastated her children's lives. So I told her when I was finished with the manuscript and I turned it in that I would print it out and fly to where she lives and I would read it to her. And I did. My goal in doing that was I knew that my mom did not know a lot of the things that happened to me in my childhood. And I also knew that from the age of 13 on, she was not a part of my life regularly. And so I knew that a lot of the things that I was going to reveal and the things that I was going to talk about, she was unaware of them. And so I knew as a mom myself, I knew that she would grieve the things that happened to me. And I wanted to be with her in the flesh and be a comfort to her with my very presence as she grieved, even though we don't see eye to eye about religion at all. But I knew that from where I was and the spirit in which I wrote the book and the spirit in which I wanted to tell my story to the world wasn't to cause more damage.
Right.
I wanted it to be a redemptive act.
Yeah. You're so evolved, Anna. I mean, you are so, just to go back and to be with your mom in that place. And I'm so glad that you did that. That's a gift. That was a gift to her. I want to talk about, because you're somebody who I think is impressive, and we're doing these questions with everybody who does a second shot sit down. A couple of reasons. First of all, because I like to hear about other people that, that people I find inspiring, who they find to be inspiring and want to meet with. I also really believe in speaking things into existence and saying them out loud if you want them to happen. So I want to hear from you, Anna. Who are the 3 people living that you would like to meet with, hang out with, chat with?
Oh my gosh. 3. Top of the list, number 1 is the Queen, Brene Brown.
Yes.
I quote her, and I've learned so much from her books.
Yeah.
She has mentored me and doesn't know it.
Yes. Well, maybe one day she will. I don't think it's that far off. I really don't.
I hope so. Number 2 would be Oprah Winfrey. Oh my gosh, who doesn't want to have a sit down with Oprah? And I've learned a lot from her as well.
Yes, she's a secret mentor of mine too. So Oprah, let's do this.
And then this last one is somebody that I have met, but I've never had a sit down with.
Okay, who is it?
And that's Beth Moore.
Tell me about Beth.
Beth Moore is a writer of women's Bible studies.
Oh, great. Okay.
And the first one I ever did was way back in the day when she wrote a Bible study called Breaking Free.
Okay.
And that Bible study impacted my life and began the spiritual healing that I needed. And so I'm just all emotional thinking about it.
I am for you too, because because these things can happen. Look at what's happened in your life so far. And I would love for you to be able to connect with all these women who have impacted you so greatly. Second question that we're doing is our franchise for all of the second shot sit downs. Considering everything you've been through, where you've been, where you are now, what happened in between, if you could choose, would you choose for life to be wholly fair or wholly unfair?
I would choose unfair. Life has been unfair to me, and it's those things that have caused me to rise up, to claim who I am, to become the person that God created me to be, and find a way to express myself to the world. And if it weren't for the injustices that I have experienced, I wouldn't be the person that I am today.
Wow. That is bold. I mean, it's impressive. And if somebody's not, if you're not inspired by that, I don't know what to do with you. If you're not motivated by what Anna's saying, it really is a lot, considering you would say that. The last thing is, now you already got your book deal and you have your book, but we're going to do a hypothetical here because I like to have a 1-line chunk of advice for people. So here's the hypothetical. I'm going to give you a book deal, and I'm going to get that book in the hands of every single person who's ever needed a second shot, which is basically everybody. Am I right?
Yes.
What's the 1 line of that book? It's a 1-line book. What's it going to be? And we're going to distribute it worldwide.
It is possible to heal from childhood trauma, abuse, and neglect.
It's possible. Anna, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I just was so, I just know that there's people who need to hear your story. I know it. I feel it. I know that you're going to change people, through sharing this. Tell everybody where they can find you. I know that you've got a super fun, active Instagram. I love watching you at your CrossFit workouts here in North Texas. Where can everybody find you on Instagram, website, book, all that?
All of my social media is Anna K. LeBaron. My website is annalebaron.com. And I don't know if you know this. My sister and I are flying to LA at the end of this month, and we're in October of 2019, just in case people hear this later.
Yeah, good call.
So we're flying at the end of October to LA to record a podcast, a true crime podcast, where we get to talk about our family of origin, the things that happened, and also tell the redemptive stories.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
So in order for, to find out,
her.
AnnaLeBaron.com/podcast and go sign up. And as soon as it's ready for the world, we will email you, and so you can subscribe and download and listen and have fun with that.
Yeah, that's great. We'll link up her sites on the podcast too. Anna, you're amazing. I'm personally inspired. This has been great. You guys, if you got anything out of this episode, then leave us
Hit
a rating.
me up on social.
Yeah, then
and
hit her
tell
up
me.
in social. Let her know you saw her. Leave a rating and a review. You know what I mean? Go on, get the book. I did it in audiobook because it's on his voice. So I felt like I was getting to know you through that. So do the audiobook, do the book. It's called The Polygamist Daughter. And if you like second shot sit downs, we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're on iHeartRadio, we're on every single podcast platform there is. So if you're watching on Facebook, go over to the podcast platform. We are doing a 2-month-long series of interviews like this with the whole intention of getting you to the end of the year feeling like you can do this and you're going to tackle 2020. So we will see you next time. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.